Allow me to introduce myself. Camarados, this is no book. Who touches this touches a man. It is I you hold, and who holds you. I spring from these pages into your arms. I'm Walt Whitman. I always think of you with so much love. I've often wondered if you would know me. Are you surprised to find yourself visiting with a dead man? Surprised to see me, seemingly alive, risen from my grave to speak with you? I wish I could translate the hints about the dead young men and women, and hints about the old men and mothers, the offspring taken too soon out of their laps. What do you think has become of the young and old men? What do you think has become of the women and children? They are alive and well somewhere. The smallest sprout shows there really is no death. And if ever there was, it led forward life and does not wait at the end to arrest it and cease the moment life appeared. All goes onward and outward. Nothing collapses. And to die is different from what anyone supposed, and luckier. Has anyone supposed it lucky to be born? I hasten to inform him or her, it is just as lucky to die, and I know it. I pass death with the dying, and birth with the new-washed babe, and am not contained between my hat and boots, and peruse manifold objects, no two alike, and all of them good. The earth good, the stars good, and all of their adjuncts good. Now, I'm not an earth, nor an adjunct of an earth. I am the mate and companion of people, all just as immortal and fathomless as myself. They do not know how immortal, but I know. This is the book of me, the song of me. I thought it could save us, that poetry could save us. As a child, my family lived in Brooklyn, among other places. Perhaps the signal event of my life up to that time was acquiring a subscription to a big circulating library. I reveled in romance readings of all kinds. First, the Arabian Nights, all the volumes, an amazing treat, and quite naughty. Then with sorties in many other directions. I devoured Walter Scott's novels, one after another, including the poetry. The cornerstone for that library was laid by General Lafayette in a visit to America in 1824. He came over to Brooklyn in state and rode through the city. The children of the schools turned out for the welcome, including myself. The huge irregular excavation for the building was already dug, surrounded with heaps of rough stone. Several of the gentlemen assisted the children in lifting them up to safer, convenient spots to see the ceremony. Among the rest, Lafayette, also helping the children, picked me up, my 5-year-old self, pressed me a moment to his breast, kissed me, and set me down to a safe spot in the excavation. That kiss baptized me for democracy. I'm the second of 8 children. My father was a Thomas Paine Democrat, an alcoholic, never read a word of my poetry. He took me out of school at the age of 11, having decided it was time for me to have a job. I was a printing apprentice, a a printer's devil for the Long Island Patriot, the first in a long line of newspaper jobs. I've been fired more times than I can remember. The Brooklyn Daily Eagle, the Long Islander, the Crescent in New Orleans. One editor, taking exception to my political views, called me in to give me the bad news that I was being fired. He began the conversation like this. Mr. Whitman, I really don't know how we're going to get along without you. But starting Monday, we're going to try. Upon my return from New Orleans, I founded the Brooklyn Freeman, a free soil newspaper. Now, free soil was the idea that slavery should be banned in any of the new states coming into the Union. It was burned to the ground the day after my first publication. I touched a nerve. I am the poet of slaves and of the masters of slaves. I am the poet of the body. I am the poet of the body, and I am the poet of the soul. I go with the slaves of the earth, equally with the masters. And I will stand between the masters and the slaves, entering into both, so that both shall understand me alike. My father considered me to be an unnatural man. He died when I was 36 years old. His death both destroyed and freed me. What was lost was something we never had. He disapproved of me. I'm afraid he didn't live long enough to feel any remorse for his treatment of me. The day he died, I took the name Walt rather than Walter. Walter was my father's name. My father was dead. What bloomed in his absence was an aria, a song of myself. What began as 12 poems became more than 400. In a crowd of workmen, in a bar room, around a stove, late of a winter night, and I, unremarked, seated in a corner, and of a youth who loves me and whom I love, silently approaching, seating himself near that he may hold me by the hand. There, we two, content, happy in being together, speaking little, perhaps not a word. I lived a long time without love, or with only the fleeting semblance of it, pale substitutions. Then I fell in love with Peter Doyle. It was shortly after the war. He had been a Confederate soldier, so young. We were inseparable, very close. Here he is, my rebel friend. You see how we sit, facing each other? And between us, such a feeling of joy, of love. I loved him. I love him still. He was a master character, a rare man, knowing nothing of books, but knowing everything of life. A big, hearty, divinely generous working man. A mutual friend once wished Pete was a girl. That would make everything much easier. I told him not to be too hard on it. I was already hard on myself, and Pete felt this guilt too, even threatened suicide. Wickedness unspeakable, death and disgrace here and hell's agonies hereafter. My own weakness, this guilt, where I too am most lacking, I tried again and again to pursue him no more. I, over and over, tried to give up this feverish, fluctuating, useless, undignified pursuit of this man I loved. But I had persevered. So humiliating. And then anything to avoid seeing him, meeting him, any talk or explanation. But there was always just one man for my heart, and that was Peter Doyle. Wicked, lovely, loving Peter Doyle. When we were together, we were in heaven. That's where heaven was, in Peter's arms. He'd leave our bed to go home to his mother in the middle of the night, and she'd be waiting for him, waiting to shriek at the poor boy that he was unnatural, a filthy sin, an abomination in the eyes of God. It made him suicidal and spun me out into a wilderness of grief. He gave me up, married a girl, settled down. I'd go to the bar, sit in the back, buy a drink for this young man or that, strangers, and then go home with them. One night with black-eyed George Fitch, a Yankee boy and tall. One night with a boy called Mike Ellis, fourth story back room. Lexington and 32nd, bitter cold. One night with William Culver, aged 18. One night I slept with Daniel Spencer, a feminine boy and beautiful. Another lonely night I brought Theodore M. Carr to the house with me. Then it was James Sloan, 23 years of age, plain, homely, American. Drunken John McNelly. Jerry Taylor slept with me one night. David Wilson. Horace Ostrander. This is a list of loneliness. I'd trade every kiss, every caress, all the love that God has meted out for me. I'd trade it all to walk in the sun, holding the hand of Peter Doyle. Day by day, night by night, we were together. All else has long been forgotten by me. I believe in you, my soul. The other I am must not abase itself to you, and you must not be abased to the other. Loaf with me in the grass. Loose the stop from your throat. Not words, not music or rhyme I want, not custom or lecture, not even the best. Only the lull I like, the hum of your velvet voice. I mind how once we lay such a transparent summer morning, how you settled your head athwart my hips and gently turned over upon me, and parted the shirt from my bosom bone, and plunged your tongue to my bare stripped heart, and reached till you felt my beard, and reached till you held my feet, swiftly arose and spread around me the peace and knowledge that pass all the argument of the earth. And I know that the hand of God is the promise of my own. And I know that the Spirit of God is the brother of my own. And that all the men ever born are my brothers, and the women my sisters and lovers, and that a kelson of the creation is love. When the war began, my brother was one of the first soldiers to volunteer to fight. 2 weeks after he marched off, I found his name on a posted list of the wounded. And I turned from the list, and well, I simply ran toward the sound of war. My first confirmation that I had found war was a pile of arms and legs outside a narrow 2-story house. They had been using the upper floor for surgery and tossing the limbs they'd amputated out of the window. I found my brother only slightly wounded, a shrapnel cut to the chin. I was asked to accompany the wounded upriver by steamboat to Washington, and I complied. My first day in Washington, the Daily Morning Chronicle reported 13,267 sick and wounded soldiers in the hospital of the city. I could see the need, and I did what I could. By the end of the war, 18,000 had died in the hospitals of Washington. I became a volunteer nurse for the duration of the war, supporting myself with government jobs when I could keep them. My book's reputation had preceded me. I was personally fired by the Secretary of the Treasury, Mr. Solomon Chase, who judged me to be a decidedly disreputable person. Another said he found my writing obscene, said he fired me for moral turpitude. Washington was one big hospital. That little town was indeed a town, but of wounds, sickness, and death. There was Finley Hospital, northeast of the city. Another was Campbell Hospital, both large establishments. I've known those two alone to hold from 2,000 to 2,500 inmates. Then there was Carver Hospital, larger still, a walled and military city regularly laid out and guarded by squads of sentries. Then further off east was Lincoln Hospital, and a half-mile past that, Emory Hospital. All of these were but a portion. The Harewood, Mount Pleasant, Armory Square, Judiciary Hospital, all large collections. During those 3 years, I made over 600 visits and went, as I estimate, from 80,000 to 100,000 of the sick and wounded, as sustainer of spirit and body to some degree in time of need. These visits varied from an hour or two to all day or night, for with dear critical cases, I generally watched all night. Sometimes I took up my quarters in the hospital and slept or watched for several nights in succession. Those years I consider the greatest privilege and satisfaction. With all their feverish excitements, physical deprivations, and lamentable sights, and of course the most profound lesson of my life. I can say that in all my ministerings I comprehended all, whoever came my way, northern or southern, and slighted none. It aroused and brought out and decided undreamed of depths of emotion. I was with many rebel officers and men among our wounded, and gave them always what I had, and tried to cheer them the same as any. And among the black soldiers, sick and wounded, or in the contraband camps where the runaway slaves took refuge, I also made my way. I did what I could for them. I distribute oranges, honey, paper, pencils, coins. A miracle how a few coins in one's pocket can cheer a fellow. I read letters, wrote letters, held hands, dressed wounds, and I held many a young man as he died. I did what I could for all of them, black, white, northern, southern, and they welcomed me with love. Except for a particular nurse I can think of now, a very Christian lady, who in her rounds at the hospital would preach to legless boys about the sin of dancing. We agreed to mutually disapprove of each other. I stayed late one night at the bedside of a new patient, a young Baltimorean, aged about 19 years, 2nd Maryland, Southern, very feeble, right leg amputated. Couldn't sleep hardly at all, had taken a great deal of morphine, which as usual was costing more than it comes to. Evidently very intelligent, well-bred, very affectionate. Held on to my hand, put it near his face, not willing to let me leave. As I was lingering, soothing him in his pain, he said to me suddenly, "I hardly think you know who I am. I don't wish to impose upon you, but I'm a rebel soldier." I said I did not know that it makes no difference. I visited him daily after that for about 2 weeks while he lived. Death had marked him, and he was quite alone. I loved him much. I always kissed him, and he did me. In an adjoining ward, I found his brother, a Union soldier, an officer of rank, a brave and religious man, badly wounded, lingered, suffered much, died. It was in the same battle that both were hit. One a strong Unionist, the other secesh. Both fought on their respective sides. Both badly wounded. Both brought together in death after a separation of 4 years. Each died for his cause. Bearing the bandages, water and sponge, straight and swift to my wounded I go, where they lie on the ground after the battle brought in, where their priceless blood reddens the grass or the ground, or to the rows of the hospital tent, or under the roofed hospital, to the long rows of cots up and down each side I return, to each, to all. One after another, I draw near. Not one do I miss. One turns to me his appealing eyes. "Poor boy, I never knew you, yet I think I could not refuse to die for you, if that would save you." On I go. The crushed head I dress. Poor crazed hand, tear not the bandage away. The neck of the cavalryman, with the bullet through and through I examine. Hard the breathing rattles, quite glazed already the eyes, yet life struggles hard. Come, sweet death. Oh, beautiful death, in mercy, come quickly. I have bad dreams. In one of the late movements of our troops, a strong force of mounted rebels attacked a train of the wounded. The ambulances contained about 60 wounded, quite a number of them officers of rank. The rebels were in strength, and the capture of the train was effectually accomplished. No sooner had our men surrendered than the rebels instantly commenced robbing the train and murdering their prisoners, even the wounded. Among the wounded officers in the ambulances were one, an officer of regulars, and another of higher rank. Those two were dragged out on the ground on their backs and were now surrounded by the rebels. A demoniac crowd, each member of which was stabbing them in different parts of their bodies. One of the officers had his feet pinned firmly to the ground by bayonets stuck through them. These two officers had received about 20 such thrusts, some of them through the mouth and face. A force of our cavalry charged suddenly upon the captors, who proceeded at once to make the best escape they could. Most of them got away, but we captured 2 officers and 17 men in the very acts just described. The situation was one which admitted of little discussion, as may be imagined. The 2 officers and 17 men were put under guard for the night, but it was decided there and then that they should die. The next morning, the 2 officers were taken in the town, separate places, put in the center of the street, and shot. The 17 men were taken to an open ground, placed in a hollow square, half encompassed by 2 of our cavalry regiments. One regiment had only 3 days before found the bloody corpses of 3 of their men, hamstrung and hung by the heels from limbs of trees. The other had not long before had 12 of their men, after surrendering, shot and hung by the neck with jeering inscriptions pinned to the breast of one of the corpses. But now, with revolvers, they formed the grim cordon of the 17 prisoners. The latter were unfastened, and the ironical remark made to them that they now be given a chance for themselves. A few ran for it, but what use? From every side the deadly bullets came. In a few minutes, 17 corpses strewed the hollow square. I was curious to know if some of the Union soldiers, some few, some 1 or 2 at least of the youngsters, did not abstain from shooting on the helpless men. Not one. There was no exultation, very little said, almost nothing. But every man there contributed his shot. Multiply this scene by scores, hundreds, verified in all the forms that different circumstances, individuals, places could afford. Lighted with every lurid passion, the wolves, the lions lapping thirst for blood, the passionate boiling volcanoes of human revenge for comrades, for brothers slain, with the light of burning farms and heaps of smutting, smoldering black embers. And in the human heart everywhere, black worse embers. And you have an inkling of this war, the dead in this war. There they lie, strewing the woods, the fields, the valleys, the hillsides. the grisly ravines, the bloody promenade, all the varieties of the strayed dead, 25,000 national soldiers killed in battle, never buried at all, 5,000 drowned, 15,000 inhumed by strangers or on the march in haste in hitherto unfound localities. 2,000 graves covered in sand and mud, 3,000 graves carried away by the caving in of banks. Dear God, the numberless camps, battles, hospitals everywhere. The crop reaped by the mighty reapers, typhoid, dysentery, inflammation, and darkest of all, the dead and living burial pits, the prison pens. Not Dante's pictured hell and all its woes excelled those prisons. The dead, the dead, the dead, our dead, ours all. Finally, dear to me. Somewhere they crawled to die alone. In bushes, low gullies, on the sides of hills. There in secluded spots, their bleached skeletons, bones, tufts of hair, fragments of clothing. Our young men, once so handsome, so joyous, taken from us. The son from the mother, the husband from the wife, the dear friend from the dear friend, the general million, the infinite dead. The land entire, saturated, perfumed with their impalpable ashes exhalation, in nature's chemistry distilled, and shall be so forever. And every future grain of wheat and ear of corn and flower that grows in every breath we take. So much to forgive in ourselves, yet so much that is beautiful. I knew Lincoln. Lincoln is my man, and I am his. I imagined him long before I saw him. I'd prayed for a Redeemer president of these states to come out of the real West, the log hut, the clearing, the prairie. I'd be much pleased to see some heroic, shrewd, fully formed, healthy-bodied, middle-aged, beard-faced American blacksmith or boatman come down from the West, cross the Alleghenies, and walk into the presidency dressed in a clean suit of working attire and a tan all over his hands, face, and breast. I saw him first when he was the president-elect, arriving in Washington. I saw the president almost daily in the summer of 1863. We exchanged bows, and quite cordial ones. He had a face like a Hoosier Michelangelo. So awful ugly, it becomes beautiful with its deep-cut crisscross lines and donut complexion. He had a rather dusty, rusty appearance, looks about as ordinary in attire as the commonest man. Probably you've seen faces that in their homeliness or even ugliness held superior points, so subtle yet so palpable, making the real life of their face almost as impossible to depict as a wild perfume or a fruit taste or the passionate tone of the living voice. Such was Lincoln's face. Of technical beauty, it had nothing. But to the eye of a great artist, it furnished a rare study, a feast and a fascination. All the current portraits are failures. Most of them are caricatures. There was a deep latent sadness in the expression. He was very easy, flexible, tolerant, almost slouch regarding minor matters, but capable of indomitable firmness, even obstinacy on rare occasions involving great points. He was a family man, but had an air of complete independence. He went his own lonely way, disregarding all the usual ways, refusing the guides, accepting no warnings, just keeping his appointment with himself every time. His foundations were mystical, abstract, moral, spiritual, and his religious nature was of the amplest, deepest rooted, loftiest kind. He was the greatest, best, most characteristic, artistic, moral personality in American life. And if I'm to be remembered, let it be as Lincoln's man. Peter was there that night in the theater when the president was murdered. He's described it to me many times, so much so that it's come to feel as if it is my own memory. I'd rather not speak of it now. One scene will suffice to show the event's effect upon our citizens. As Sherman's armies were marching through South and North Carolina, having received the news of Lee's surrender, the men never made a mile without sending up continued inspiriting shouts. All day long sounded out the wild music of those peculiar army cries. Down with the traitor! Up with the stars! The Union boys forever! Hurrah! Hooray! At length whole corps and armies joined in these wild, triumphant choruses. This exuberance lasted until the troops arrived in Raleigh. There they received the news of the president's murder. Then, no more yells or shouts. All the marching was comparatively muffled. It was very significant. Hardly a loud word or laugh in many of the regiments. A hush and silence pervaded all. When lilacs last and the dooryard bloomed, and the great star early drooped in the morning sky, I mourned and yet shall mourn with ever-returning spring. Ever-returning spring, Trinity sure to me you bring, lilac blooming perennial, drooping star in the west, and thought of him I love. O powerful western fallen star, O shades of night, O moody, tearful night, O great star disappeared, O the black murk that hides the star, O cruel hands that hold me powerless, O helpless soul of me, O harsh surrounding cloud that will not free my soul. I left school after the 6th grade. And ever since, I've nourished a green-eyed envy for those with a beautiful education. In my jealousy, I took on the lifelong acquisition of what I felt was owed me, an education. I've read a great deal of Shakespeare, Homer, Dante Alighieri, among others, and certain passages remain with me. Dante wrote that the darkest places in hell are reserved for those who maintain their neutrality in times of moral crisis. The moral crisis of my time was slavery. Just before the war, before the death of my father, I accepted a newspaper job in New Orleans. Now, in most towns of my time, there was always at least one place where slave auctions were held. In New Orleans, the entire town was a monument to that peculiar institution. On the street outside my place of employment, there were more than 50 auction blocks running the length of the avenue. And in the finest hotel in the city, there was a room where slaves for sale were stripped naked and examined in the most inhumane way. Human beings were sold like paintings or furniture. I saw children sold, separated from their mothers, sold to different masters. It was the most heart-rending sight I've ever endured. And I've seen men die, many men. I saw slaves kicked. I saw them whipped. They were made to open their mouths and show their teeth like animals. One afternoon, I took my younger brother, who had accompanied me to New Orleans, to have our photograph made. Daguerreotypes were the latest innovation, and we had been told that there was one photographer and one alone who could do it. He'd been trained in Paris by Monsieur Daguerre himself. To our surprise, the artist was a black man. I was so startled by this man. Not just that he was a free black man in the midst of a city full of slaves, but that he was so well spoken. I treated him to a barrage of questions about his situation and learned he had been born in Paris, educated in Europe, and had an education, a classical education, to rival anyone at Oxford or Cambridge. I walked miles over the next few days, all over that city, my head in a tempest. I stopped in a cafe one morning where a black woman behind the counter made me a cup of coffee. And I asked her what she thought of the institution of slavery. She told me slavery was the sin that God abhorred the most, and that America would pay in blood and keep on paying. Best cup of coffee I ever had. I was afraid that I had become the victim of a certain way of thinking. I began to question everything I thought I knew and to re-examine everything I had been taught. I began to seek my higher self. I could feel two forces at work within me. My father's rigid, somewhat tyrannical ideas, and my mother's warm acceptance of all souls. My mother was a follower of the itinerant Quaker preacher, Elias Hicks, a mystic radical, an abolitionist who wrote, "To rob a rational being of his liberty and free agency was to rob him of everything valuable in this world he could possibly possess or enjoy." I went to New Orleans one person, but I came back another. I ended up writing an article about that photographer. It went unpublished. The editor, citing my abominable politics, fired me the same day it was submitted. It was a job worth losing. There are those who maintain the Civil War was fought for states' rights. The Civil War was fought over the issue of slavery. Please make no mistake about that. And my book and the war were one. In a time of great darkness, brother fought brother in a war meant to free an enslaved people. And we almost destroyed ourselves. Lincoln said, "America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves." In writing the poems, my intention was one-minded and pure. I thought it would stop the war. Go ahead, laugh if you like. I was convinced that if people would just read the poems, they would realize there is no difference between us. We have more in common than separates us. My wish was to set flowing in men's and women's hearts, young and old, endless streams of living, pulsating, terrible, irrepressible yearning. Surely, more or less down underneath, in most human souls, this never-satisfied appetite for sympathy, this universal democratic companionship, this old, eternal, yet ever-new exchange of adhesiveness, so fitly emblematic of America, which I wish to give in my book, undisguisedly, declaredly, with the openest expression. I thought it would be a new Bible, one that would free us. I wanted to free the slaves. I wanted to free women. I wanted to free myself. Creatures longing to be free should be free. Sales were slow. If nothing else, I did free verse. One of the few bright spots of that time involved the poet Ralph Waldo Emerson, about whom I am as weak as water. I absolutely idolized him. When I was still building houses with my father, I was reading Emerson's essays during my lunch break. Through Emerson, I was able to locate myself. I had been simmering. Then Emerson brought me to a boil. I'd sent him a copy of Leaves and really expected to hear nothing at all. But I received a letter. This letter has given me no end of comfort and inspiration, so much so that I've kept it on my person since the day I received it. Dear Sir, I am not blind to the worth of the wonderful gift of Leaves of Grass. I find it the most extraordinary piece of wit and wisdom that America has yet contributed. I am very happy in reading it, as great power makes us happy. I give you joy of your free and brave thought. I have great joy in it. I find incomparable things said incomparably well, as they must be. I greet you at the beginning of a great career. Your book has the best merits, namely that it is fortifying and encouraging. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Henry David Thoreau heaved my book across the room, called it the work of a beast, declared himself horrified. Critics reviled it, called it blasphemous, silly. One critic suggested that my book was an explosion in the sewer and that I should be publicly whipped. Another critic said I should kill myself. What is it that separates any of us? I thought I had been born the right time in the right place. Amidst the epic transformation of a great people was the justification of my life, written in the book of fate. I thought it was my fate to be the nation's bard at its turning point in history. I thought my poetry could save us. I discovered it could not. Oh, how I despaired. I cannot express the sadness I felt, which threatened to sink me forever. I was sure, like Leonardo da Vinci, that God was divinely dissatisfied with me. Oh me, oh life, of the questions of these recurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, cities filled with the foolish, of myself, forever reproaching myself for who more foolish than I? Who more faithless? Of eyes that vainly crave the light, the objects mean, the struggle ever renewed, the poor results of all, the plotting and sordid crowds I see around me, the empty and useless years of the rest. With the rest, me, intertwined. The question, so sad, recurring, what good amid these, O me, O life? Answer, that you are here, that life exists and identity, that the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. This song of ourselves is a river of voices, a river of optimism. You must carry on. It was my poem's own message to myself that triumphed in my mind. The song is to the singer and comes back most to him. Poets to come, orators, singers, musicians to come. Not today is to justify me and answer what I am for, but you, a new brood, native, athletic, greater than before known. Arouse, arouse, for you must justify me. You must answer. I myself but write one or two indicative words for the future. I advance but a moment, only to wheel and hurry back into the darkness. I am a man who, sauntering along without fully stopping, turns a casual glance upon you, then averts his face, leaving it to you to prove and define it, expecting the main things from you. It is the hope that poetry can save us that matters the most. It is the hope that must survive. The act of creation is as important as the creation itself. And I stand not alone, but shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand, with a long line of poets, past and future. May all our children be poets. This is what you shall do. Love the earth, the sun, and the animals. Despise riches. Give alms to anyone who asks. Stand up for the stupid and crazy. Devote your income and labor to others. Hate tyrants. Argue not concerning God. Have patience and indulgence toward the people. Take off your hat to nothing known or unknown, nor to any man or number of men. Go freely with powerful, uneducated persons and with the young and mothers of families. Read these leaves in the open air in every season of every year of your life. Re-examine all you have been taught in any school, church, or book. Dismiss whatever insults your own soul, and your very flesh shall be a great poem, and have the richest fluency, not only in its words, but in the silent lines of its lips and face, and between the lashes of your eyes, and in every joint and motion of your body. The man's body is sacred, and the woman's body is sacred. No matter who it is sacred. Is it the meanest one in the laborers' gang? Is it one of the sad-faced immigrants just arrived at the wharf? Each belongs here or anywhere, just as much as the well-off, just as much as you. Each has his or her place in the procession. All is a procession. The universe is a procession with measured and perfect motion. It was in Camden, New Jersey, near the end of my life, when I finally owned my own house. 6 rooms, no furnace, situated between a guano factory and a church with a bad choir. Now, I know there's a joke in there somewhere. Sales of Leaves of Grass bought that house. Poetry paid for it. My book was eventually banned, which was great for sales. My housekeeper, a lady down the road who'd lost her own home, moved in with me. She brought her black cat, her dog named Watch, a robin, a canary, 2 turtle doves. Dying was my only escape. Come, lovely and soothing death. Undulate around the world, serenely arriving in the day, in the night, to each, to all, sooner or later, delicate death. Yet I know we are deathless. Do I contradict myself? Very well. Then I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. I am Walt Whitman of Manhattan, the sun, turbulent, fleshy, sensual, eating, drinking, and breeding. No sentimentalist, no stander above men and women, nor apart from them. No more modest than immodest. Unscrew the locks from the doors. Unscrew the doors themselves from the jambs. Whoever degrades another degrades me. Whatever is done or said at last returns to me. I speak the password primeval. I give the sign of democracy. By God, I will accept nothing which all cannot have their counterpart of on the same terms. The spotted hawk swoops by and accuses me. He complains of my gab and loitering. I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. Yawp! Yawp often, my friends, yawp often. It's good for the soul. The last scud of day holds back for me. It flings my likeness after the rest, true as any on the shadowed wild. It coaxes me to the vapor and dusk. I depart as air. I shake my white locks after the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drift it in lacy jags. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I will be good health to you nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood. Failing to fetch me at first, keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stopped somewhere, waiting for you.